In January, Russian forces advanced at a relentless pace in the southern part of the front. Foreign elements had crossed the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and were now only 5 kilometers away from Pokrovsk. They were so close from this strategic Ukrainian town that they could smell the corruption. However, in early February, the momentum flipped with the Starlink shutdown. Grabbing this unique opportunity, Ukraine launched a large counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk directions, which regained a lot of ground. To this effect, Politico reported, Ukraine retakes territory as Russia's buffer zone strategy falters. There was a real sense of hubris. The NAFOs crawled out of their caves. And on Twitter, they started writing victory posts for Ukraine. It has finally happened! The Russian army's collapsing! Well, yeah, sort of. And then the dream was shattered. Russia halted the Ukrainian offensive and inflicted a terrible rate of attrition. After that, Russian storm detachments counterattacked and meticulously recaptured one lost position after another. It seems that being slapped in the face just makes the Russians DTF or down to fight. My friends, welcome to the headquarters. Don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe. In this video, we'll analyze Ukraine's surprise winter offensive and the Russian counterattacks that followed. And as always, at the end of the video, we'll try to predict what could happen next. But before we start, a quick word from today's sponsor. Hey guys, real quick before we keep rolling, today's video is sponsored by ChatLLM by Abacus AI. And honestly, this is the one AI tool you will use every single day. Nowadays, we're swarmed by LLMs. ChatGPT 5.2, Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini 3 Pro, Grok 4.1, DeepSeek. So many to choose from. ChatLLM gives you everything in one place for only $10 a month. Route LLM automatically picks the best model for you depending on your prompt. Same for AI image and video generation. ChatLLM supports Nano Banana Pro, Grok Imagine, Seedream 4.5, ChatGPT Image Gen Model, Kling, you name it. Tired of AI sounding texts? Just click Humanize and problem solved. Oh, you forgot to make a PowerPoint for tomorrow's presentation. Abacus AI builds full professional presentations instantly. The star is Abacus AI Deep Agent, a beast that autonomously codes features, builds apps, websites, AI agents, hits GitHub with PRs, and handles deep research like a full team. All this for just $10 a month. Way cheaper than separate subscriptions for all these AI services. And with huge token limits. No more juggling tabs. Try it now by clicking the link in the description below. So let's take a closer look at what is happening on the southern part of the front. This was the situation as per the last update of ukraineviews.org on the 16th of January. As you can observe, forward elements of the Russian army were only 5 kilometers away from the outskirts of Pokrovsk. It's also in this direction that Russian troops used horses. Although Pokrovsk was only a town of 10,000 inhabitants before the war, its importance lies in the fact that it's located in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Its capture would open the gate to this entire oblast for Russia. And yeah, don't be confused. I'm talking about Pokrovsk, which is not the same as Pokrovsk. Decommunization done well. At the same time, further south, Russia's 5th Army also captured the stronghold of Hulialpole and was charging westwards. I even said in one of my previous reports that if the Russian army continued to advance at the same pace, they would reach this line by the summer of 2026. As you can see, the situation was quickly becoming catastrophic for Ukraine. That's when the general staff of the AFU put an end to the party and counterattacked. The problem for the Russian army is always the same. To evade drone detection, they're obligated to operate with small fire teams of 2 to 4 men, and these patrols can push deep into enemy lines. But then these units are not strong enough to actually hold the ground and repel Ukrainian counterattacks. This is part of what enabled the AFU to achieve significant territorial gains. In summary, let's just say the Ukrainians benefited from a little help from above. Here we can read, Starlink shutdown, Musk throws Russian forces into chaos. Russian troops noticed the first Starlink disruptions on the 4th of February 2026. And apparently 75% of all Starlink terminals active in Ukraine were shut down just like that, meaning 3 in 4 terminals were in Russian hands. Ukrainian forces in that sector immediately used this opportunity to launch shaping operations to test Russian defenses. The first strike took place on the 8th of February when Ukraine's 475th Assault Regiment stormed Tarnuvate. Here we can see one of the Ukrainian soldiers recording the settlement. And as you can see, it seems as if there was barely any resistance from the Russian side. The Ukrainians struck right at the weak point of the Russian battle line. This was followed by a multitude of limited-scale ground assaults all along the front line, which allowed the AFU to regain a large chunk of the Haichor River. It was clear that the Russian defense in the Huliaipole sector was completely disorganized. For example, this truck full of infantry was hastily dispatched to reinforce the front, but that's when precise artillery fire eliminated the entire unit. On the 19th of February, Ukrainian drones cleared the hamlet of Zlahoda. 2 days later, Ukrainian patrols were spotted in Ternove. That same day, the Russians raised their flag on Priluki, only for the flag bearer to be immediately targeted by enemy drones. In the week that followed, Ukrainian reserves kept pouring to the contact line. That's why Russian artillery bombarded all the main axes of approach. And then the Russian command unleashed the bees.
Fire all the drones now!
Lancet drones struck a Ukrainian armored vehicle in Novoalexandrivka and another one in Aristopil, followed by swarms of Russian fiber optics drones that rained on exposed Ukrainian armored vehicles and assault teams. As a reminder, Ukraine concentrated a lot of its elite shock units in this part of the front for this counteroffensive, meaning all these losses will be very hard to replace. I guess they can always find more in Colombia. Yes, you can marry Ukrainian woman if you sign up now, but first you go to front. Most of these drone strikes took place in the north around Berezovye and Ternove, and the Russian fireworks continued until the end of February. Despite all these Ukrainian penetrations, on March 1st, some Russian troops managed to raise the white-blue-red flag on Rizhdianka. It's been a while we haven't seen a proper Russian flag raise. Do they still know how to do it? That's when, on the 5th of March, a Ukrainian patrol engaged in a firefight with soldiers of the Russian 1466 Motor Rifle Regiment just outside Huliaipole. Multiple Russian armored vehicles were also destroyed in the same sector. Just as the Russian command was stabilizing the front line, the Ukrainians broke through in the south and were now about to retake Huliaipole.
Oh, okay.
That's not all. The next day, just outside Berezovye in the north, Ukrainian aviation bombarded an entire trench line. And you know what? The defenders just had enough and they surrendered.
All hope is failing, my lord! The battle is almost done!
On the 10th, close quarters fighting was reported in Novokhirivka. And on the same day, the 425th Assault Regiment Skala announced the liberation of Ternove. Many commentators in Ukraine were shocked by the unit that captured the settlement. That's right, a column of fully caged-up Soviet armored vehicles followed by infantry mounted on quad bikes. Could have been a Russian unit. You see, one reason this war is lasting so long is because both sides keep copying each other. Whenever one side rolls out a new trick, the other just hits Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, and we're back at square one. 3 days later, on the 13th of March, Ukrainian drone strikes harassed Russian infantry in Uspenivka. That same day, the Russian command brought urgent reinforcements to the front. One column regrouped in Poltavka, but that's when they got targeted by long-range drone strikes and HIMARS. When things like this happen, it's because Ukrainian drones managed to fly 25 kilometers inside Russian lines without being intercepted. Not only did they spot the column, but they could also stay in position to guide artillery fire. And for the Russian command, the situation just worsened in the following days. By the 20th of March, drones of the Ukrainian 225th Assault Regiment worked on mopping up the tree lines west of Huliaipole. It seemed to have been successful because 2 days later, Russian artillery shelled the western outskirts of the town, meaning the AFU regained a foothold in Huliaipole. The Ukrainians were that close to reconquering the strategic city. Now that would have been a complete humiliation for Russia. Further to the north, Ukrainian quads were detected near Solotke, just west of Uspenivka. By that point, in the southern sector, the Russian front was falling apart like marmalade. The Ukrainian winter counteroffensive allowed the expansion of the buffer zone around Pokrovsky from 5 kilometers to 22 kilometers, with a near complete liberation of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, meaning the achievement of both a military and political objective. This is the map AMK posted on Twitter. According to his estimations, the AFU regained 288 square kilometers during its winter counteroffensive. Additionally, the Ukrainians managed to regain a foothold in Hulialpole, and the entire Russian front along the Haicho River was about to fall apart. However, the battle was not over yet. The Russian command tried to counterattack with a mechanized formation, but it was clumsy, and these vehicles got taken apart by enemy drones. But then, on the 23rd of March, a Russian sabotage group managed to infiltrate all the way to Ternovate. The general staff of the AFU was really confused.
What are you doing here?
This means there's still important Russian concentration of forces in and around Dobropilya, a town that most NAFO bots claimed as captured by the AFU. Russian pockets were also attested in Andrivka as well as in Danilivka. That could explain why, on the 29th of March, Ukraine's 1st Separate Assault Regiment launched an attack west of Priluki. The objective was probably to cut off the Russian troops in Dobropilya and then pivot south towards Hulialpole. Let's just say I had the same battle plan last night. In the footage, we can see a Ukrainian tank releasing massive loads from only 50 meters away at Russian infantry holding this trench bastion. It was a sticky situation for the defenders, but it seems it was only a fire mission because there was no footage of Ukrainian stormtroopers taking hold of this bastion. On the 3D map, the trench bastion is located on heights overlooking the hamlet of Priluki, 1,000 meters away. The Ukrainian tank attacked across this open ground, as we can see at the beginning of the video. Then the tank cut through the tree line in this area and fired at the trench bastion. But then on April 1st, the Russians sent reinforcements to this sector. One of these units being a group of 5 motorcyclists, the Modern Dragoons. Unfortunately for them, the moment they disembarked, they were ambushed by enemy drones. Later that day, the Ukrainian command received some more troubling news. The Russian 64th Motor Rifle Brigade raised its flag 4 kilometers behind Ukrainian lines in the village of Boykove. Blyat, how do they do this? How do the Orsk keep respawning there? In the video, the Russian brigade also showed how they cleared the settlement from various enemy armored vehicles and multiple groups of infantrymen.
Our men flee the battlefield!
But this meant that if the Russians controlled Kozivtseve and Boykove, Ukrainian forces in Ternovate were now about to get encircled. Ukraine's hubris following their initial successes was now firing back. Most of the Ukrainian gains were made possible through elite assault regiments, namely the 1st, 33rd, 225th, 425th, and 475th Assault Regiments. But conceptually, these units are specialized in storming enemy positions. And once they achieve this, they pull back. And since the Ukrainians don't have enough reserves, it seems that nobody can actually hold the terrain that they just gained. By that point, the AFU was slowly getting pushed back, and it was losing a lot of manpower and armored vehicles. For example, north of Verbove, 10 kilometers from the contact line, Russian drones destroyed a US-made Striker APC. 24 hours later, Russian infantrymen were spotted in Varvarivka, the same village where we just saw the motorcyclists. Yeah, people were laughing because this soldier here looks like a midget compared to the guy in the front. I don't know, maybe it's Asterix and Obelix. Then 8 kilometers to the south, in Zaporizhia, just outside Hulialpole, the Ukrainian drone unit Phoenix hammered Russian units. This is a compilation of these strikes throughout multiple days. Ukrainian drone operators found a name for this, game.
Welcome to the Running Man!
Overall, I counted about 10 Russian soldiers struck by FPV drones in 4 days. It's always important to remember that despite the shock factor, these drone videos are mostly meant for PR, because the reality is that the AFU is simply not able to regain a foothold in this very important settlement. The next day, back in Varvarivka, we see 2 Russian soldiers exiting a house. One has a water bottle in hand and the other a camouflage net. They barely walk a couple meters, then they get ambushed and shot down at point blank by soldiers from the 225th Assault Regiment. This means there's a lot of back and forth along the Haichur River north of Hulialpole between Priluki and Varvarivka. Both sides are attempting to outflank each other. Now if we move northwards to the border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, Ukrainian drones struck Russian forces in Ternove and Privolye, while Ukrainian artillery bombarded the village of Zlahoda. Remember, these are all settlements that the Ukrainians had officially liberated. But now the Russians are back. Sort of. You know what? In many cases, it seems they actually never left. This means in February, Ukrainian spearheads just bypassed enemy strongpoints in order to advance rapidly. But the Russians didn't retreat. In turn, the Ukrainian offensive eventually slowed down because they didn't have the reserves to mop up these positions left behind. This is effectively a big gray zone. The positions of both sides just overlap each other. It's very messy. Think of it like the ethnic map of Lebanon. Oh yeah, something interesting happened on the 4th of April. We're literally witnessing the future of warfare. Robots fighting robots.
Oh my god, you're such a noob! This has been happening for months!
Yes. That topic actually deserves a self-standing video. Anyway, let's continue. Here we can see drones from the Russian 36th Motor Rifle Brigade clearing the sky of enemy drones, mainly targeting the big Baba Yaga and Vampire bomber drones. But they're also destroying relay antennas as well as countless unmanned ground vehicles used to resupply troops on the ground. At this rate, I think by the end of the year, most frontline logistics will be replaced by unmanned systems. That same day, Ukraine's 33rd Assault Regiment counterattacked in Boykove, and in the footage, we can see some of its stormtroopers raising the blue and yellow flag over the village.
We have captured a building, my lord!
However, one of their vehicles that wanted to bring reinforcements was hit by the 14th Spetsnaz Brigade. 24 hours later, on the 5th of April, Russian forces were spotted advancing into the eastern part of Berezove, and on the 6th, they had pushed even further. Meanwhile, Russian detachments were also detected inside the village of Ternove. Remember how the infamous Elite Skala Regiment announced the liberation of the settlement on the 10th of March. 1 month later, they had effectively lost control of the place. As you can see, the Russian army was slowly undoing the Ukrainian gains from the winter. I guess there's not gonna be a summer body. On the 8th of April, the Ukrainian 225th Assault Regiment once again targeted Russian forces in the village of Varvarivka. In response, Russian aviation bombarded the command post of the 225th Assault Regiment with FAB-500 bombs. And in response to that, Ukrainian aircraft dropped 2 GBU-62s on Hulialpole. That's the Ukraine war version of a tennis match. On the 11th of April, the 425th Assault Regiment Skala once again struck Russian forces in the southern part of Ternove. That same day, Russian aviation obliterated an entire tree line 15 kilometers from Hulialpole. In the past weeks, Russian aviation focused on the sector between Rivne and Vozvidjivka, probably to stop Ukrainian reinforcements from reaching Priluki and Varvarivka. That's one possible analysis. The second analysis is that, according to Suryak map, the front line actually sits 2 kilometers west of the railway line. So these airstrikes could mean preparatory bombardments before the storming of these urban areas. Similarly, Ukrainian artillery from the 82nd Airborne shelled a group of 4 Russian soldiers south of Novokhyrovka, most likely in order to halt the flow of enemy forces pushing out of Uspenivka. And as you can see on the map, this direction would bring the Russians back in Verbove, and then they would only be a stone's throw away from the Vovcha River and Pokrovske. Meanwhile, to the west, fighting around Ternovate continued. On the 13th of April, a Russian soldier was struck in the neighboring village of Kozivtseve. He was wounded and he could have definitely been captured. But what was troubling is that the Ukrainian command then sent 2 riflemen to finish him off. At the same time, we're talking about the 33rd Assault Regiment. There is Vatnik wounded in forest. You go there and you eliminate him.
Okay.
The next day, on the 14th of April, Russian forces dropped FAB 500 and FAB 1500 bombs on this town of Vozvidivka we just mentioned. And 5 kilometers beyond that town, the 108th Territorial Defense Brigade shot down a Zala Lancet drone. Not only does this mean that the no man's land nowadays is 10 to 15 kilometers deep, but it could confirm the theory that the Russian army is trying to storm Vozvidivka. There are dozens of reports of Ukrainians shooting down Russian recon drones circling over the city. On the 17th of April, Ukrainian airstrikes targeted Stepove. Unless someone called a broken arrow, this means Russian patrols were now operating 3.5 kilometers beyond Berezove. That could also explain why Ukrainian artillery suddenly shelled Novomykolaivka and Novokhyrovka. Just like we just mentioned, there's increased Russian activity along this axis north of Uspenivka. At last, according to the latest news, on the 19th of April, a 6-man Russian motorcycle assault unit pushed through Sviatopetrivka. The next day, more Russian troops were detected in Svitovke. And that's not all, because a Russian rifleman was also hit just outside Verkhnya Tersa. So we can clearly see the direction of the Russian push. Overall, it's clear to me that by now, the Ukrainian offensive in the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk directions has lost its momentum. And now we're facing a renewed Russian offensive. Now, because of this Ukrainian counteroffensive from February, I think the Russian command changed objectives. Instead of focusing solely on Pokrovsky, the new objective is the stronghold of Orikhiv. We can notice how the first shaping operation started on the 13th of March. 24 hours later, Russian TOS-1 flamethrowers launched an intense bombardment against the settlement of Hulialpilske, located 14 kilometers west of Hulialpole. Then came rumors that the 76th Airborne Division was redeployed to take Orikhiv from the east. The cornerstone of this entire Russian flanking maneuver was the town, or rather village, of Hulialpilske. Without it, the entire Russian strategy would fall apart. On the 20th of March, Russian reinforcements riding motorbikes reached the town of Zaliznichne, followed by a second wave of reinforcements on the 22nd, and then a third wave the next day. So, I repeat, for the Russian command, the objective was to secure the entire perimeter around the settlements of Hulialpole and Zaliznichne, and once that was completed, move on to Hulialpilske along the TO-8-14 road. From there, they could stage a large sweeping movement westwards deep in the rear of Orikhiv, and thus force the fortress city into a cauldron. So that was the battle plan, to take Orikhiv from the east, but at the same time the Russians would also attack from the south. Russian generals are well aware of it. Whenever possible, always push with 2 shafts at the same time. The objective of this sudden part of the operation was to gain a foothold in Mala Tokmachka and from there storm Orikhiv. Maybe the plan was great on Hearts of Iron 4, but it didn't work out. That's how on the 29th of March, Ukraine's 65th Mechanized Brigade stopped a large Russian mechanized assault leaving Robotine along the TO-408 road. As you can observe, the footage is brutal. The Russians got hammered. I mean, just look at that. Who would think that attacking with armored vehicles in plain open terrain like that would work?
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
That same day, another Russian assault was halted a couple kilometers to the east. Final tally, 1 Hedgehog tank, 1 APC, and 2 Ulan buggies were destroyed, and a reported 10 infantrymen were KIA or wounded. In the meantime, on the 2nd of April, Russian aviation dropped an FAB 3000 against Orikhiv. This is something I noticed from the Russian command. When they're salty after a failed attack, yeah, they just bomb the place and turn it into ruins. If I can't have it, nobody can. That same day, Russian infantrymen were spotted 1,000 meters north of Mirne, and one of them clearly showed how much he loved drone warfare. 3 days later, Russian riflemen were now detected 2,600 meters beyond Mirne. We can also clearly see the gear this Russian soldier was carrying. Big backpacks, lots of water, and many plastic bags. Strange, it reminds me of the people squatting the area near the train station. Overall, it's obvious that Russian storm detachments will follow the tree line all the way into Hulialpilske. And to cover their progression, the Russian 11th 98th Motor Rifle Regiment cleared the sky over Mirne from enemy Baba Yaga drones. It's also not a coincidence that the Russian command launched drone strikes in the same sector. That was on the 10th of April and again on the 16th east of Hulielpilske. And this was followed by Russian artillery strikes on the 17th north of the village. Now the situation for the general staff of the AFU is that since they already used up all the reserves, all their assault regiments in the northern part of Zaporizhia Oblast, I don't think they have enough reserves to counterattack near Orikhiv or even near Hulielpilske. I mean, they could, but that would come at the risk of weakening other parts of the front. And my friends, this is what we call the war of attrition. At the same time, we can also observe increased Russian drone activity against Ukrainian logistics on the important Zaporizhia-Orikhiv highway. So Orikhiv is clearly one of the main objectives for the Russian army in 2026. Because the moment they capture this town, then they can leap their way forward from one urban area to another, all the way to Komishuvacha, which is, hold on, let me check on the map, 23 kilometers further. And that would effectively put the Russian army just outside the major city of Zaporizhia. Now, this analysis wouldn't be complete without taking a look at what's happening in Kamyanske, this town sitting on the banks of the Dnieper River, and relatively close to the big city of Zaporizhia. That was the front line according to Deep State UA on the 23rd of March. That day, Ukrainian soldiers recorded themselves operating in the settlement of Stepnohirsk, a little town of 4,000 inhabitants before the war. Its importance lies in the fact that it's just north of the river, so it controls the entire sector, and there's also an industrial area, a mine just 3 kilometers east of the settlement. On the 28th of March, 2 Russian Sarmat 2 buggies were destroyed east of Kamyanske. And then on the 1st of April, the Ukrainian drone unit Rubak Vrie identified a number of houses as held by the enemy. But these buildings were geolocated here and here in Primorske, which, as you can observe, is pretty deep inside the urban area. 3 days later, the Ukrainian 128th Mountain Assault Brigade targeted the Russian soldier 2,000 meters east of Stepnohirsk. Meanwhile, Zodiac maps announced a Ukrainian counterattack north of the same settlement. And many pro-Ukrainian analysts believe this would be the Schwerpunkt of a new Ukrainian counteroffensive. 10 days later, on the 14th of April, Ukrainian aviation carried out precision strikes with AASM Hammer bombs on an enemy drone control center in Kamyanske. It's not a coincidence that 24 hours later, Zodiac maps mentioned another Ukrainian counterattack that regained ground in Novoyakovlivka and in the industrial complex east of Stepnohirsk. Remember how Russian soldiers were reported deep inside Primorske? Well, on the 19th, it was now multiple Ukrainian patrols that were reported south of the settlement. This led the team behind the pro-Russian Telegram channel Rybar to complain about the worsening situation on this part of the front. They were extremely salty, especially after what happened in the winter. And on the 22nd, Zodiac Maps reported that the AFU recaptured a number of positions in the central part of Primorske. In conclusion, during the winter, Ukraine managed to expand the buffer zone around Pokrovske and stopped the Russian push northwards. However, this came at a great cost in manpower and equipment. Additionally, Russian forces are slowly regaining the lost ground. Meanwhile, by April, we can expect Russian forces to push westwards on 5 axes: Ternuvate, Vozvidivka, Vernia Tersa, Hulielpilske, and Malatokmachka. The goal would be to push in this open corridor between Pokrovske and Orikhiv and secure the TO408 road located 20 kilometers away. This would effectively allow the Russian command to place the stronghold of Orikhiv into a cauldron. Meanwhile, in order to protect the road going straight to Zaporizhia and to prevent a full encirclement of Orikhiv, the AFU counterattacked in the Kamyanske sector. That's all I have for you today. See you in the next one.